For more on this story, let's bring in South African political commentator Daniel Silke, who joins us on the line from South Africa. And Daniel, we were just discussing then the future of the ANC post Mandela, the direction that it would take the country in, and whether indeed it is still Mandela's party. What's your assessment?
Yes, hi there. Look, I agree with the previous commentator in that Nelson Mandela really hasn't played a role from a political point of view within the ANC for many years. He served one term in office between 94 and 99, and subsequent to that has had little effect on the policy making within the ANC. I think the country is buffeted by a series of both global and domestic issues that really are creating a degree of, I think, consternation within the ruling party in terms of future policy. And I have to say that whilst Mr. Mandela's passing, eventually when it happens, will be very emotional for most South Africans. We will all wake up the next day and we will all have to, in this country, deal with some of the very tough economic and social questions that have reared their heads over the course of the last decade or so. Mr. Mandela's legacy, of course, is reconciliation amongst all South Africans, and I think that's a very strong legacy that still remains within the minds of the ruling party and other South Africans as well.
And Daniel, you talk about that legacy. Mandela is also very much the moral compass of the country. What sort of a loss would that be with his eventual passing?
Yes, I think that part of the legacy is the humanity and the morality of the individual for the time that he was in office. And I think there has been question marks of the current state of leadership in South Africa, the political leadership, in terms of we've seen a rise in corrupt activities within government. We've seen question marks as to the insider trading of many of the of government officials, jobs for pals, as it might be called. And I think that there is concern that South Africa is slipping away from the moral high ground that was the legacy of the Nelson Mandela presidency. But at the same time, of course, we have an evolving political situation in South Africa. We've got new political parties. We've got a very vibrant democracy in South Africa. And we have a ruling party, the ANC, the party of Mr. Nelson Mandela, who is in fact itself very divided on policy choices for the future. So the debate in South Africa is going to rage on as to how the country should progress, and ultimately from a democratic point of view I think it will be fairly positive in the medium term, but clearly solving the short-term problems in South Africa is going to require very deft leadership, skilled leadership, and I think that the jury is out as to whether the existing current ruling party will be able to accomplish that.
Daniel, where would the political challenge to the ANC come from?
Well, for the moment, the ANC still remains very strong. In any international language, to get 60% plus of the overall vote in an election would mean a virtual landslide. And the ANC looks as though it may just shed a few percentage points from its 63% down to 60% or just under 60% in the next election next year. If there is any challenge to the ANC, it's coming from the major opposition party in South Africa, the Democratic Alliance, and also from perhaps a newer player. We've just seen the launch this last weekend, ironically, in the weekend, of course, that Nelson Mandela took so ill, a new political party criticizing the African National Congress for inefficiency, for corruption, led by a very notable and credible academic, Rampeli. And I think there's something of an alliance building against the ANC, an alliance of centrists and moderates as well. And of course, this alliance could capitalize on disaffection within the ANC as well. I don't think that the ANC is going to be threatened by external political parties. I think the biggest threat to the ANC is from within. In other words, the cohesiveness of the ANC may well come into question over the next few years.
And Daniel, this centrist political alliance that you speak of here, that would also indicate that the country is not divided along racial lines. The Democratic Alliance, of course, predominantly white party.
Well, I think we've moved away from racial politics. I think that there are certainly elements within the ruling political party that would like to keep racial politics alive because, in a sense, it's a rallying cry to your supporters. But we are seeing South Africa's newer political parties really taking members of all races, of all social strata. And over the course of time, 20 years after the liberation election, I think South Africans are moving now from race-based politics to issue-based politics. In other words, they're saying, look, yes, we acknowledge acknowledge the role that Mandela and the ANC had in bringing us liberation, but the real issues are what kind of education is my child getting, what healthcare services is my family getting. It's an issue-based politics that's emerging in South Africa, which is quite healthy for the country in the future.
Beyond Mandela as a symbol, if you assess the ANC's political leadership, its guidance of the country, when you reflect on some of the deep problems that the country still suffers today, how would you be able to assess the political legacy? Has the vision that Mandela had for the country been fulfilled?
Look, I think the vision was an outstanding foundation for South Africa. Without the role of Nelson Mandela, and I think we should give credit also to the broader ANC during the period from 1990 to 1994, and we should also give credit to the white minority rulers of the day as well, who worked together to develop a brand new constitution for South Africa. Without this, of course, we would simply have, I think, deteriorated into that sort of racial abyss that so many predicted for us. So there's no doubt in my mind that the legacy of Mandela and those that worked with Mandela on all sides of the political spectrum is a lasting legacy. And this legacy of reconciliation, of reaching out to your former enemies, of nation building, I think is very much still part and parcel of the broader South Africa. But of course, when buffeted with these social inequalities, with global issues, with economic hardship and very high unemployment within the country, very hard-nosed political decisions have to be taken on new policies for the country. And the Party of Liberation, this liberation ethos, is not really going to help a modern-day political party trying to grapple with current issues and future issues. It's a different political game in South Africa, and I think the legacy of liberation is going to be subsumed with hard-nosed political policy decision-making issues and that we are now confronting in South Africa.
What are the political options open to the leadership there when you look at the range of problems from health to housing to education, unemployment? What are the type of policies that the leadership can have to cast around for?
Well, it's a good question. I think that there are two schools of thought within the ruling political party. One is to take a view that South Africa needs to be a market-friendly, globalized economy. It needs to be competitive. It needs a competitive labor regime, and it needs to also move more into manufacturing, away from the extraction of minerals, which has been the key foundation of our economy. The other school of thought within South Africa really is a more socialist, perhaps even more populist school of thought that would call for greater degrees of government intervention, a socialist state, a state that's less friendly towards the private sector and more friendly towards the state and the state taking control. It's an old economic debate that's raged in Africa and elsewhere for many decades, and I still think these two policy options are very much on the table here in South Africa. But I think from a political point of view within the country, the business community in South Africa is still extremely strong. The opposition movements in South Africa still centrist or centre-right, in other words, supporting a market-style economy into the future. These forces, I think, together with those within the ANC who want this, I think are going to be the dominant forces into the future.
Daniel Silke, a pleasure to speak to you on the program. Thank you so much for that.